Harlow Vance had seen a lot of weird things in 8 years of hauling cargo across the galaxy, but a museum full of dead alien junk wasn't even in her top 20. She'd wandered into the Koltaran Galactic Museum purely by accident, lured by the promise of clean bathrooms and maybe, if the universe felt generous, a vending machine that dispensed something other than nutritional paste. Station Pinnacle 18 was one of those absurdly fancy orbital platforms where everything cost 3 times what it should, and everyone walked around like they had a stick lodged somewhere uncomfortable. The kind of place where her beat-up cargo hauler, currently sitting in Bay 23 with a busted cooling system, stuck out like a mud stain on white silk. The repair estimate had come back with enough zeros to make her eyeballs hurt, and the mechanic had given her that special look reserved for pilots who probably couldn't afford his services. So yeah, she had time to kill. Might as well kill it somewhere with climate control. The museum's grand opening had drawn quite the crowd. Beings from at least a dozen species milled around the entrance hall, all dressed in clothes that probably cost more than her ship. Harlow tugged at her jacket, trying to cover the stain on her shirt from this morning's catastrophic coffee incident, and slipped past a cluster of Vondish diplomats who were chittering excitedly about something called the Kesith Collection. Great. Dead stuff from a dead civilization. Her favorite. The main exhibition hall stretched out like something from a fever dream, all vaulted ceilings and dramatic lighting designed to make you feel appropriately insignificant. Display cases lined the walls, each one containing artifacts that probably had long, boring histories attached to them. Weapons that hadn't killed anyone in millennia. Pottery that hadn't held anything in even longer. The usual museum fare, just with more tentacles and fewer humans involved in the making. A tall, impossibly thin being with too many eye stalks and an expression of permanent constipation stood near the entrance, greeting visitors with the enthusiasm of someone who'd rather be literally anywhere else. His skin had that peculiar blue-green sheen that marked him as Koltaran, and his official museum badge identified him as Erlich's senior curator. "Welcome, welcome," Erlich droned, his voice carrying the flat affect of someone who'd said the same thing 8,000 times, and would happily say it 8,000 more if it meant keeping his job. "Please observe all posted guidelines. Do not touch the displays. Do not attempt to commune with the artifacts. Do not— oh, for the love of— Sir, that is a ceremonial death mask, not a hat." Harlow bit back a smile and kept walking. Somewhere in this maze of overpriced historical clutter, there had to be a restroom. She wove through clusters of admirers, past displays of ancient armor that looked deeply uncomfortable, past what appeared to be a fossilized something. Honestly, without the placard, it could have been anything from a religious icon to a kitchen appliance. The crowd thickened as she approached the museum's centerpiece, announced by unnecessarily dramatic music piped through hidden speakers and lighting that could have doubled as an interrogation technique. Whatever it was, people seemed excited about it. Or at least, they were making the kind of appreciative noises beings made when they thought they should be impressed. Harlow pushed through the final layer of onlookers and found herself in a circular chamber with a raised platform at its center. On that platform, under a beam of light so intense it probably violated several safety regulations, sat a skull. Not just any skull, apparently. According to the holographic display flickering beside it, this was the death crown of the Kesith Empire, a relic from a warrior culture that had conquered half the known galaxy before mysteriously vanishing into whatever cosmic dustbin collected failed civilizations. The skull itself was roughly humanoid in shape, 2 eye sockets, a jaw, the usual skull architecture, but there was something off about it. Too smooth, too symmetrical, and it seemed to shimmer slightly, like it couldn't quite decide whether it wanted to be bone or metal or something in between. "Magnificent, isn't it?" someone whispered nearby, a Peltheran engineer with bioluminescent patches along her neck, 12,000 years old and still radiating power signatures. The Keseth were masters of biomechanical integration. "Mm-hmm," Harlow replied, which was her standard response when she had no idea what someone was talking about and didn't particularly care to learn. The skull was mildly interesting in an abstract sort of way, but mainly she was focused on spotting a restroom sign. She started to move around the perimeter of the chamber, scanning for exits, when the skull moved. Not a lot, just a slight rotation on its pedestal, maybe 15 degrees, smooth as butter and completely silent. The kind of movement that made your brain stutter because objects in museums, particularly objects that had been sitting motionless for 12,000 years, were not supposed to move. The chamber went dead quiet. Every eye stalk, and optical sensor in the room locked onto the skull, which had rotated just enough to face directly toward Harlow. Then, with the same eerie smoothness, it tilted forward in what could only be described as a bow. Harlow said, which seemed like an appropriate response to whatever was happening. The skull held its position, angled toward her like a dog waiting for a command. The dramatic lighting made the whole thing look even more unsettling, casting shadows across its smooth surface that seemed to shift and writhe. "Did that just—" the Peltheran engineer started. "It moved," someone else finished. "It bowed," a third voice added helpfully. The crowd began to murmur, a rising tide of confusion and excitement that Harlow wanted absolutely no part of. She took a step backward, toward the exit, and the skull tracked the movement. Its eyeless sockets followed her like it could see despite being, a skull. "Okay, that's weird," Harlow muttered. "Security!" The screech came from Erlix, who had materialized at the chamber's entrance with all his eye stalks quivering in what Harlow assumed was alarm. "Security! To the Keseth exhibit! Immediately!" "I didn't touch anything," Harlow called out, raising her hands in the universal gesture of, "Please don't shoot me." "I was just looking for the bathroom." "The artifact is responding to your presence." Erlix's voice had climbed several octaves into a range that probably bothered every dog within a 5-mile radius. "What did you do? What kind of human trickery is this?" "Human trickery?" Harlow repeated. "Buddy, I'm a cargo pilot. My most advanced technology is a coffee maker that only breaks down twice a week. I have no idea what's happening." Heavy footsteps announced the arrival of station security, led by a Thraxian whose bulk filled the doorway like a particularly muscular wall. His species had evolved on a high-gravity world, which meant he stood maybe 5 feet tall, but probably weighed more than Harlow's ship. His uniform was immaculate, his expression was stern, and his nameplate read, "Bormund." "Report," Bormund said, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "The human activated the death crown," Erlix shrieked, pointing one trembling appendage at Harlow. "She used some kind of forbidden technology to—" "I literally just walked into the room," Harlow interrupted. "That's it. I walked, it moved, everyone freaked out. Can I go now?" Bormund's eyes, small and dark in his craggy face, shifted from Harlow to the skull, which was still bowed in her direction. "The artifact has never moved before. Not once in the 3 months we've had it. Not once in the 12,000 years before that, according to all records." "Well, congratulations. You've got a haunted skull," Harlow said. "That's definitely going to boost ticket sales. Now, if you'll excuse me..." She tried to step toward the exit, but Bormund moved with surprising speed, blocking her path. "I'm afraid I'll need you to remain here for questioning." "Questioning? About what? I didn't do anything." "The artifact responded to you specifically," Bormund said, pulling out a data pad and beginning to tap notes with fingers the size of sausages. "Station protocols require investigation of any unexplained technological activation. It's a skull. Maybe it just got bored sitting still for 12,000 years. The Keseth Death Crown is not just a skull," Ehrlichs interjected, having recovered enough composure to sound offended. "It is a priceless artifact from one of the most advanced civilizations in galactic history. It does not simply get bored." Harlow pinched the bridge of her nose, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. This was exactly the kind of cosmic nonsense she'd spent 8 years trying to avoid. She hauled cargo. Simple, straightforward, boring cargo. No ancient mysteries, no unexplained phenomena, no skulls that bowed when she entered a room. "Look," she said, trying for a reasonable tone. "I'm sure there's a perfectly logical explanation for this. Maybe there's a draft in here. Maybe someone's pulling a prank. Maybe—" The skull moved again, this time rotating to follow her as she gestured. Every being in the chamber took a collective step backward. "Okay, that's less great," Harlow admitted. Bormund tapped his communicator. "This is Security Chief Bormund. I need a full scientific team to the Keseth exhibit immediately. And someone get Dr. Quarn. If anyone can explain this, it's him." "Dr. Quarn is retired," a tinny voice replied through the communicator. "I don't care if he's dead. Get him here." Harlow sighed and found a bench along the chamber's wall, figuring she might as well get comfortable. The skull continued to track her movement, rotating slightly as she sat down. The crowd had mostly dispersed, replaced by security personnel who were setting up scanners and looking generally confused about what they were supposed to be scanning for. Ehrlichs paced back and forth, all his eye stalks waving in agitation. "This is unprecedented. Unprecedented. The Keseth technology is inert, completely inert. It has been for millennia. Our own scientists confirmed this before we accepted the artifact." "Maybe your scientists missed something," Harlow suggested. "Impossible. We ran every test known to xenoarchaeology. Energy signature analysis, temporal resonance scanning, biomechanical interface detection. The crown was completely dormant." "And yet," Harlow gestured at the skull, which obligingly demonstrated its newfound mobility by tilting slightly further in her direction. A new figure entered the chamber, moving with the unhurried pace of someone who had long since stopped being impressed by the universe's nonsense. He was Koltaran, like Ehrlichs, but older, with eye stalks that had a slight droop to them and skin that had faded to a lighter shade of blue-green. He wore casual robes instead of a uniform, and he carried a battered satchel that looked like it had seen every corner of the galaxy and hadn't enjoyed any of them. "Dr. Quarn," Bormund greeted him with obvious relief. "Thank you for coming." "I was in the middle of lunch," Dr. Hillix Quarn replied mildly. "This had better be worth cold soup." He approached the death crown with the kind of casual disregard that made Ehrlichs twitch. One eye stalk extended to examine the skull from multiple angles, while the others swept across the chamber, finally settling on Harlow. "You're the human," he stated. "Apparently," Harlow replied. "Interesting." Dr. Quarn pulled a handheld scanner from his satchel and waved it in Harlow's general direction. "Move to your left, please." Harlow slid along the bench. The skull rotated to follow her. "Now, to your right." She moved back. The skull tracked her again. "Fascinating," Dr. Quorn murmured. "The biorecognition matrix is active. I haven't seen that in, well, ever, actually. The Kesseth systems should have died with their empire." "What does that mean?" Ehrlich demanded. "Why is it responding to this human?" "That," Dr. Quorn said, settling onto the bench beside Harlow with a grunt, "is an excellent question. Young lady, I'll need to run some scans. Full genetic workup, biosignature analysis, the whole tedious process. Do you consent?" "Do I have a choice?" Harlow asked. "Not really," Dr. Quorn admitted cheerfully. "But I find it polite to ask. Bormund, have your people set up a scanning suite in the research wing. This is going to take a while." As security began herding everyone toward the exit, Harlow cast one last glance at the death crown. It remained tilted in her direction, patient and silent, and utterly inexplicable. "Just once," she muttered. "I'd like a simple day. Just once." The skull, predictably, offered no response, but Harlow could swear, though she'd never admit it, that it looked almost smug. The research wing of the Koltaran Galactic Museum smelled like recycled air and disappointment, which Harlow figured was appropriate for a place dedicated to studying things that had stopped being relevant thousands of years ago. Dr. Quorn had set up shop in a lab that looked like someone had exploded a computer store inside a hospital, all blinking screens and sterile surfaces and machines that hummed in frequencies that made her teeth itch. "This won't hurt," Dr. Quorn said, which in Harlow's experience meant it absolutely would hurt. "People who say that are always lying," she replied, eyeing the scanning array with suspicion. "Not lying, exactly, more like optimistically interpreting the definition of pain." He tapped commands into a console with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "The genetic sequencer will feel like a mild tingling sensation." "Uh-huh." "Followed by a moderate burning sensation." "Great." "And possibly some temporary paralysis in your extremities. But that's perfectly normal and will wear off in a few hours." Harlow started to stand up. "You know what? I think I'll just live with the mystery." Bormund, who'd been standing guard by the door, cleared his throat meaningfully. His hand rested on what Harlow assumed was some kind of weapon, though with Thraxian security, it could have been anything from a stun pistol to a particularly aggressive paperweight. "Right," Harlow said, settling back into the scanning chair. "Mild tingling. Got it." The machine powered up with a whine that set her nerves on edge. Blue light washed over her from multiple angles, and true to Dr. Quorn's word, her skin began to tingle. Then burn. Then go, completely numb in a way that made her seriously reconsider every life choice that had led to this moment. "Vitals are stable," Dr. Quorn announced, studying a readout that meant absolutely nothing to Harlow. "Genetic markers processing. Should have preliminary results in about 20 minutes. 20 minutes of this?" Harlow managed through gritted teeth. "Oh no, the scanning only takes 3 minutes. The rest is just data analysis." He glanced at her with what might have been sympathy. "You can move now, by the way." "Well, in a few seconds, once sensation returns." Sensation returned in a rush of pins and needles that made Harlow seriously consider several creative uses for the scanning equipment, none of which involved its intended purpose. She flexed her fingers, waiting for the feeling to settle back into something resembling normal. Ehrlich had joined them at some point during the scan, looking like he'd aged several years in the past hour. All his eye stalks drooped with exhaustion or stress, or possibly just the weight of cosmic unfairness. "The museum board is in an uproar," he announced. "Half of them want to shut down the exhibit immediately. The other half want to capitalize on the publicity and charge triple admission." Naturally, Dr. Quorn said, not looking up from his screens. Do you have any idea what kind of scandal this could create? The Kesseth Empire has been extinct for 12,000 years. Their technology is supposed to be completely inert. If word gets out that we have an active artifact that responds to random humans, she's hardly random if the Crown recognizes her, Dr. Quorn interrupted mildly. That's rather the opposite of random, in fact. Harlow's headache had graduated from annoying to actively malicious. Can someone please explain to me what the Kesseth Empire actually was? Because I slept through most of my galactic history classes. Dr. Quorn pulled up a holographic display with a few taps. Images flickered into existence, showing sprawling cities of biomechanical architecture, fleets of ships that looked more grown than built, and beings that could have passed for human if you squinted and ignored some fairly significant anatomical differences. The Kesseth, Dr. Quorn began, in the tone of someone settling in for a good lecture, were what you might call aggressively expansionist. At their peak, they controlled roughly 40% of what we now consider the known galaxy. They were masters of biomechanical integration, combining living tissue with advanced technology in ways we still don't fully understand. Sounds delightful, Harlow muttered. They were, by all accounts, rather unpleasant neighbors. Conquest was encoded into their culture at a fundamental level. Some scholars believe it was literally encoded into their genetics. Dr. Quorn zoomed in on an image of Kesseth warriors in elaborate armor. Their entire species was built around absolute loyalty to their Empress line, genetic conditioning, biomechanical implants, cultural indoctrination, the works. So, what happened to them? Harlow asked. That, Dr. Quorn said, is the question that's kept xenoarchaeologists employed for the past 5,000 years. One day they were the dominant power in half the galaxy. The next, they were gone. Ships abandoned, cities empty, every trace of their civilization just stopped. People don't just vanish, Harlow said. You'd be surprised. The galaxy is full of empty spaces and unanswered questions. Dr. Quorn returned his attention to the genetic analysis, which was still processing with agonizing slowness. The death crown you encountered was one of their most significant artifacts. War masters wore them, high-ranking military commanders who served directly under the Empress. The crown wasn't just ceremonial, it was a command interface for their military systems. Urlix had gone very still. Are you suggesting the human could activate Kesseth military technology? I'm suggesting nothing yet. I'm waiting for data. Dr. Quorn's eye stalks remained fixed on the screens, though one twitched slightly with what Harlow was learning to recognize as irritation. Patience, Urlix. Science doesn't run on panic. The board will demand answers. The board can demand whatever they like. I'll have answers when I have answers. The lab fell into uncomfortable silence, broken only by the hum of machines and the occasional beep of processing data. Harlow slouched in her chair, running through a mental checklist of all the cargo runs she was missing. The repair bill on her ship was bad enough without adding lost revenue to the equation. Tell me about yourself, Dr. Quorn said suddenly. Harlow blinked. What? Your background, where you're from, who your parents were, that sort of thing. He glanced at her with genuine curiosity. Humor, an old researcher. There's not much to tell. I'm from Earth, grew up in foster care in a city called Cincinnati. Never knew my birth parents. Joined a transport crew when I was 18. Saved up enough to buy my own ship 5 years ago, and I've been hauling cargo ever since. She shrugged. Pretty standard human story, really. No family records? No genetic registry? Nope. I was left at a hospital with no identification, no records, nothing. The social workers named me Harlow, because apparently that was trending that year. She'd made peace with that particular cosmic joke a long time ago. Why does it matter? It might not, Dr. Quorn admitted, but the Kesith were obsessed with bloodlines and genetic heritage. If the Crown is recognizing you specifically— A sharp beep cut him off. The genetic analysis had finished processing. Dr. Quorn went very still, all his eye stalks converging on a single screen. The color drained from his face, shifting from blue-green to something closer to pale seafoam. "That's unexpected," he said quietly. "What is?" Orlix demanded, rushing over to peer at the screen. "The human has Kesith genetic markers." The lab went silent again, but this time it was the kind of silence that preceded very loud, very unpleasant things. "That's impossible," Orlix breathed. 3% of her genetic code shows clear Kesith ancestry," Dr. Quorn continued, his voice taking on that clinical detachment scientists used when they were looking at something that broke all their assumptions. Diluted, obviously, but unmistakable. Harlow's headache intensified. "I'm sorry. What?" "You have Kesith DNA," Dr. Quorn repeated, turning to face her with an expression that mixed fascination and something that might have been pity. "Which raises a rather interesting question. How does a human from Earth end up with genetic material from an empire that supposedly went extinct 12,000 years ago?" "I have several questions," Harlow said slowly, "and all of them are variations of what the hell?" Dr. Quorn pulled up additional data, scrolling through screens of information that looked like alphabet soup to Harlow. "Actually, this explains quite a bit. The Crown's biorecognition systems are designed to identify Kesith genetic markers. It's been scanning everyone who enters the chamber, but you're the first person to trigger a positive response." "So it bowed because I'm part space conqueror?" Harlow's voice had climbed several octaves. "That's the explanation?" "Partly," Dr. Quorn said. "But there's more." "Oh, good. Because this wasn't weird enough already." Dr. Quorn hesitated, which worried Harlow more than anything else so far. In her experience, scientists only hesitated when they were about to drop a bomb they knew you wouldn't like. "The specific genetic sequence you're carrying," he said carefully, "doesn't just indicate Kesith ancestry. It indicates royal ancestry. You're not descended from common Kesith. You're descended from their empress bloodline." Borman's hand dropped to his weapon. Orlix made a sound like a deflating balloon. And Harlow decided that, universal consequences be damned, she was definitely finding a very strong drink. Harlow stared at Dr. Quorn for approximately 15 seconds, waiting for him to crack a smile or admit this was some elaborate prank. When neither of those things happened, she started laughing. Not polite chuckling, but full-bodied, slightly unhinged laughter that echoed off the lab's sterile walls. "Okay," she said between gasps. "Okay, that's good. You almost had me there." Dr. Quorn's expression didn't change. "I'm entirely serious." "No, see, you can't be. Because what you're suggesting is that I, a broke cargo pilot who literally scraped together credits last week to afford expired protein bars, am somehow descended from space royalty." She wiped tears from her eyes. "That's not how the universe works. The genetic evidence is quite clear. The genetic evidence can go jump." "Out an airlock," Harlow snapped, her laughter dying as the implications started sinking in. "This is insane. You're insane. I'm going back to my ship." She stood up, made it exactly 3 steps toward the door, and found Bormand blocking her path like a particularly immovable wall. "I can't allow you to leave," he said. Not until we understand the full extent of this situation. The full extent is that your fancy scanner is broken, Harlow shot back. Run it again. You'll get different results. I've already run it 3 times, Dr. Quorn said quietly. The results are consistent. You carry genetic markers from the Kesseth Empress bloodline, specifically a sequence that indicates direct descent rather than collateral relations. Ehrlich's had collapsed into a chair, all his eye stalks hanging limp. This is a disaster, an absolute disaster. Do you have any idea what the Galactic community will do when they learn we have a Kesseth heir? I'm not a Kesseth heir, Harlow insisted. I'm a human, from Earth, a planet that, last I checked, was nowhere near Kesseth space. About that, Dr. Quorn said, pulling up another holographic display. This one showed star charts, migration patterns, and what looked like genetic drift models. I've been cross-referencing your results with historical data, and I believe I know what happened. Please don't, Harlow muttered, but Dr. Quorn was already warming to his explanation. The Kesseth didn't go extinct. They fled. Sometime around 12,000 years ago, the Empire collapsed. We still don't know why, and the surviving Kesseth scattered across the galaxy. Most died out within a few generations, unable to maintain their biomechanical systems without their centralized infrastructure. He zoomed in on a particular star system that Harlow recognized with growing horror. But one group made it to a remote, primitive world in an isolated sector. A world with a developing species that was genetically compatible enough for interbreeding. No, Harlow said. Earth, Dr. Quorn confirmed. The Kesseth integrated with early human populations. Their genetic material dispersed through the species over thousands of generations. By now, approximately 40% of all humans carry trace Kesseth DNA. The lab spun slightly. Harlow grabbed the back of a chair for support. You're telling me that humans are part Kesseth? Heavily diluted, but yes. It actually explains quite a bit about human behavior, historically speaking. The aggression, the territorial expansion, the tendency toward hierarchical military structures. Humans are aggressive because we're humans, Harlow interrupted. We don't need ancient space conquerors to explain that. Fair point, Dr. Quorn conceded, but it does explain why the Death Crown recognized you. It's been scanning everyone who passed through the exhibit, waiting for someone with the right genetic markers. Then why me specifically? Harlow demanded. If 40% of humans have Kesseth DNA, why didn't it bow to the first human tourist who walked through? Because you don't just have Kesseth DNA, Dr. Quorn said. You have royal DNA, the Empress bloodline. Whatever group of Kesseth fled to Earth, they included members of the imperial family. And somehow, through 12,000 years of genetic mixing and dilution, that specific sequence survived intact in you. A soft chime from Borman's communicator interrupted the conversation. He glanced at it, and his already grim expression darkened further. We have a situation, he announced. Security is reporting unusual activity around the museum. Multiple ships have entered the system in the past hour, all making inquiries about the Kesseth exhibit. Word travels fast, Dr. Quorn observed. Too fast, Borman replied. Someone leaked information about the Crown's activation. We're getting communications from historical societies, private collectors, and at least one group claiming to represent Kesseth restoration interests. Restoration interests? Harlow repeated. The Empire fell 12,000 years ago. Dead empires have a way of attracting fanatics, Dr. Quorn said. There are groups throughout the galaxy who've been waiting for any sign of Kesseth return. They see the old empire as a golden age of order and strength. They see it as an excuse for conquest, Borman corrected grimly. I'm increasing security protocols. The museum is going into lockdown. He tapped his communicator, issuing rapid commands that Harlow only half heard over the roaring in her ears. This couldn't be happening. She'd come to this station for routine repairs, wandered into a museum to kill time, and somehow ended up at the center of an interstellar incident involving an extinct empire and her own apparently royal bloodline. I need to run more tests, Dr. Quorn was saying. If Harlow can actually interface with Kesseth technology, we need to understand the extent of her capabilities. Absolutely not, Harlow cut in. No more tests, no more scans. I want nothing to do with any of this. I'm afraid it's too late for that, a new voice said from the doorway. The being who entered moved with predatory grace, his form a chimera of features from multiple species. Humanoid base structure, but with skin that shifted between colors, like oil on water, and eyes that held far too much intelligence. He wore armor that looked ceremonial and functional in equal measure, decorated with symbols that made Harlow's head hurt to look at directly. Borman's weapon was out and aimed in half a second. How did you get past security? Your security is designed to stop thieves and vandals, the being replied calmly. I am neither. My name is Calith, and I represent the Obsidian Hand. The fanatics, Dr. Quorn said quietly. The faithful, Calith corrected. We have waited 12,000 years for this moment. The return of the Empress, bloodline. The awakening of the crown. The restoration of order to a chaotic galaxy. That's a lot of dramatic phrasing for breaking and entering, Harlow said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fact that her heart was trying to escape through her ribcage. Calith's gaze fixed on her with unsettling intensity. You mock what you don't understand. The Kesseth Empire brought unity to hundreds of worlds, purpose to billions of beings, structure where there was chaos. The Kesseth Empire, Dr. Quorn interjected, also brought subjugation, forced genetic modification, and cultural erasure on a scale that makes most historical atrocities look minor. Every great civilization requires sacrifice, Calith said dismissively. He took a step toward Harlow, and Borman's weapon hummed a warning. The crown has chosen you. The bloodline runs true. You are the returned empress, whether you accept it or not. Hard pass, Harlow said. Really, genuinely, absolutely not interested in being anyone's empress. Your destiny is not a matter of interest or choice. Everything is a choice, Harlow interrupted. And I choose to go back to my ship, finish my repairs, and pretend this entire nightmare never happened. Calith smiled, which was somehow more unsettling than his earlier intensity. I'm afraid your ship encountered an unfortunate malfunction. Catastrophic cooling system failure. Such a tragedy. Borman's communicator chirped urgently. He listened for a moment, his expression darkening. Bay 23 is reporting an explosion. One cargo hauler. Total loss. The world went very still and very cold. You blew up my ship, Harlow said slowly. I removed a distraction, Calith replied. You have greater purpose than hauling cargo. The crown awaits, Empress. The old weapons caches are scattered across the galaxy, dormant but not destroyed. With your bloodline and the crown's recognition, you could activate them all. We could restore what was lost. I'm going to kill you, Harlow said conversationally. You're going to lead us, Calith corrected. One way or another. Alarms began blaring throughout the station, and through the lab's viewports, Harlow could see ships dropping out of hyperspace, surrounding Station Pinnacle 18 in a blockade formation. The Obsidian Hand had come in force, and they weren't leaving without their empress. The alarms made thinking difficult, which was unfortunate because Harlow desperately needed to think. Her ship was gone. Actual, literal space debris. 8 years of work, every credit she'd saved. Her entire life reduced to scrap metal floating around Bay 23. And the being responsible for it stood in front of her, smiling like he'd done her a favor. "You have 10 seconds to stand down before I start shooting," Ormond announced, his weapon trained steady on Calith's center mass. "Shoot me if you like," Calith replied with infuriating calm. "My people control the docking bays, the primary reactor, and most of the station's critical systems. Kill me, and they'll vent every section except this one. Thousands will die for your pride." Bormann's finger tightened on the trigger, but he didn't fire. The Thraxian's entire body radiated fury, but he was too disciplined to call Calith's bluff without confirmation. "Smart," Calith said. "Now then, Empress." "Stop calling me that," Harlow snapped. "You have a choice to make. Come willingly, accept your heritage, and help us restore order to the galaxy. Or resist, and watch this station's population pay for your stubbornness." His smile widened. "I should mention we have 6 ships in position. Your answer determines how many beings live through the next hour." Dr. Quorn had been silent throughout the exchange, his eye stalks focused on his datapad with unusual intensity. Now he looked up, meeting Harlow's gaze with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The crown isn't just a symbol," he said quietly. "It's a command interface. If you could establish a connection." "Don't," Calith warned. "Don't encourage her to resist. The crown will obey her bloodline, yes, but it will also enhance her connection to Kesseth systems throughout the galaxy. Every weapon, every ship, every sleeping piece of technology waiting for reactivation. She'll see what power truly means." "That's what you want, isn't it?" Harlow said, pieces clicking together in her mind. "You can't activate the systems yourselves. You need someone with the royal bloodline to wake them up." "The Kesseth were thorough in their security protocols," Calith admitted. "Only Imperial blood can access the command networks. We've searched for 12,000 years, tracking genetic drift across 1,000 worlds. And then you walked into a museum, and the crown finally woke up." Ehrlichs, who'd been silent and slumped in his chair, suddenly straightened. "The crown is still in the exhibition hall, under guard." "Under my people's guard now," Calith corrected. "They've been moving it to a shuttle while we've been talking. By the time station security realizes what's happening, we'll be gone." "With or without me?" Harlow asked. "Preferably with. But we only truly need your genetic material." Calith's tone remained conversational, which somehow made the threat worse. A blood sample would suffice for most systems, though having a living cooperative empress would be more efficient. Harlow's mind raced through options, discarding them as quickly as they formed. Fighting was pointless. Calith clearly had backup, and Bormand was one Thraxian against however many Obsidian Hand fanatics had infiltrated the station. Running was impossible with the lockdown, which left talking, and she'd never been particularly good at that. "What if the crown doesn't work the way you think?" she said, grasping at possibilities. "What if it's been dormant too long, or the connection is broken, or—" "Then we'll know we tried," Calith said. "But I don't believe it's broken. The crown recognized you. It moved for you. 12,000 years of waiting ended the moment you entered that chamber." Dr. Quorn's datapad chimed softly. He glanced at it, and something shifted in his expression. One eye stalk angled toward Harlow, and he gave the tiniest shake of his head. "A warning?" An instruction? She couldn't tell. "I want to see it," Harlow said suddenly. "The crown. If you're asking me to accept some cosmic destiny, I at least want to see what I'm supposedly destined for." Calith considered this. "A reasonable request. Very well. Bormund, you'll accompany us. Dr. Quarn, Ehrlichs, you as well. No sudden movements, no heroics. My people have orders to start depressurizing sections if they lose contact with me." They moved through the museum in a tense procession, passing corridors filled with terrified visitors pressed against walls by armed obsidian hand members. Harlow recognized at least 3 species who were physically incapable of the postures they'd been forced into. The Peltheran engineer from earlier was trembling badly enough that her bioluminescent patches flickered erratically. The exhibition hall had been transformed. Additional lighting had been brought in, bathing the death crown in harsh white light that made it look less like an artifact and more like a weapon, which, Harlow supposed, it probably was. The skull sat on its pedestal, still tilted in that bowing position it had adopted when she'd first entered. Up close, she could see details she'd missed before. Hairline fractures in the bone-like material, symbols etched so small they were barely visible. A faint luminescence deep within the eye sockets. "Touch it," Calith urged. "Establish the connection. Feel what it means to be Keseth." Harlow approached slowly, aware of weapons trained on her from multiple angles. Dr. Quarn had positioned himself near a display case, his eye stalks tracking something she couldn't see. Bormund stood rigid, every muscle coiled for violence he couldn't unleash without triggering a massacre. She reached out, hesitated with her fingers inches from the crown's smooth surface. "Having second thoughts?" Calith asked. "Just wondering what happens if this goes wrong," Harlow replied. "Then we find another bloodline carrier. The galaxy has billions of humans now. Statistically, you can't be the only one." Comforting. Harlow took a breath and placed her hand on the death crown. The world exploded into information. Battle formations for fleets she'd never commanded. Strategic maps of star systems she'd never visited. Weapons specifications for ships that had been dust for millennia. The locations of hidden caches scattered across hundreds of worlds, each one containing enough firepower to conquer a dozen systems. It poured into her mind like water through a broken dam, overwhelming and relentless and absolutely terrifying. And underneath it all, a presence. Not consciousness, exactly, but purpose. The crown had been built for one thing: to serve the Empress, to amplify her will, to turn her commands into reality across the vast machinery of the Keseth war machine. Harlow could feel it waiting. All she had to do was want something, and the systems would obey. Dormant weapons would wake. Silent ships would power up. An empire's worth of military might would answer to her will. She could see why the Keseth had conquered half the galaxy. With this kind of power, who could stop them? "Yes," Calith breathed. "You feel it now. The strength, the certainty. This is your birthright." Harlow pulled images from the crown's memory. Cities burning, populations subjugated, entire species modified against their will to serve Keseth expansion. The Empire hadn't brought order. It had brought control, and it had crushed anything that resisted. She saw the end, too. The moment when the Empress line had made a choice. Faced with what they'd become, what they were doing to the galaxy, they'd shut it all down, deactivated the weapons, scattered their people, fled to primitive worlds, and let their bloodline dilute into other species, hoping distance and time would erase what they'd been. They'd chosen to end it rather than continue the conquest. "No," Harlow said quietly. "What?" Calith stepped closer. I said no. Harlow opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. I know what happened now. I know why the Kesith fell. They didn't collapse from external pressure. They chose to stop. The Empress line saw what they'd become and decided it had to end. Lies, Calith snarled. Propaganda from jealous civilizations. I'm looking at their own records, Harlow interrupted. The Crown keeps everything, including the final command issued by the last true Empress. Stand down, scatter, survive as something better. She felt the Crown's interface waiting for instruction, ready to obey the first imperial command it had received in 12,000 years. My ancestors made their choice, Harlow said. I'm making mine. She pushed her will through the connection, clear and absolute. Deactivate. All systems. Permanent shutdown. Authorization. Empress bloodline. Final command. The Crown pulsed once, brilliant and blinding. Then it went dark. Completely, utterly dark. The luminescence in the eye sockets faded. The subtle hum Harlow hadn't noticed until it stopped went silent. Across the galaxy, in hidden caches and forgotten bases, weapons that had slept for millennia shut down for good. Calith screamed, lunging forward, but Bormund was faster. The Thraxian's massive fist caught him in the midsection, lifting him off his feet and slamming him into a display case that shattered in a shower of glass. Outside, the Obsidian handships were already fleeing, their purpose destroyed along with their dream of restoration. Harlow pulled her hand away from the now inert Crown. Her head ached. Her hand trembled. But she felt lighter than she had in hours. That, Dr. Quorn said mildly, was dramatic.